At exactly 2:17 a.m., the radio tower spoke a name that had not yet been born. Not a code, not static, a full name, first and last, followed by a date 30 years in the future. The soldier froze. He was alone on night duty, deep in the woods, guarding a radio tower that officially transmitted nothing. No signals, no messages, no traffic. The Army manual described it as a redundant installation, a structure left standing because dismantling it wasn't worth the effort. But the voice on the radio knew things it shouldn't. It spoke of battles that had not yet been fought, of men who would die decades later, of cities that did not exist in 1942. And then it said his name, not his rank, not soldier, his childhood name, the one only his mother used. That was when he understood something was terribly wrong. He turned the dial off. The voice continued. The radio was unplugged. The voice continued. Outside, the forest went silent, not peacefully, but as if something had leaned in to listen. The transmission wasn't coming through the radio. The radio was only a doorway. By dawn, the soldier would hear a future casualty list with dates, locations, and final words of men still alive. By nightfall, command would order him to log the voices and never speak of them again. And within a week, one of the predictions would come true. Word for word. Years later, historians would discover fragments of those logs buried in classified archives, stamped with a warning that made no sense until the very end. Do not attempt to respond. Because the tower was never meant to send messages forward. It was built to listen, and whatever was speaking through it already knew the war's outcome. What you just heard was not a legend, and it wasn't a rumor passed between bored soldiers. It was a real military anomaly, buried, classified, and quietly erased from official World War II records. Tonight's story takes us to a remote radio tower hidden far from the front lines, where a single soldier was assigned to guard equipment that supposedly served no purpose. No transmissions, no outgoing signals, just a standing structure in the forest, humming faintly at night as if waiting. What no one told him was that the tower was never designed to speak to the present. It listened. And when it finally responded, it didn't speak in riddles. It spoke in names, dates, places, events that hadn't happened yet, and some that would never be officially acknowledged. As this story unfolds, you'll hear about military orders that made no sense, logs that were never meant to be read, and a voice that seemed to know not only the future of the war, but the future of the men guarding it. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you're drawn to stories that exist at the edge of official history, stories the military doesn't deny but doesn't explain either. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Different countries, different eras, yet these stories reach us all the same way. What makes this case disturbing isn't just the idea of voices from the future. It's the realization that someone, or something, was listening to humanity long before we knew how to listen back. And when the soldier guarding that tower finally understood what the transmissions were predicting, he faced a question no training manual could answer. If the future is already speaking, does free will still exist? The tower was already old when the soldier arrived. Its metal frame was dull, rivets oxidized, cables humming with a low vibration that never fully stopped. It stood at the edge of a forest that maps barely acknowledged, miles from any village, far from artillery routes, and deliberately distant from anything worth protecting. That alone should have raised questions. The soldier, Private Thomas Hale, had been transferred there without explanation. No commendation, no punishment, just a reassignment, stamped urgent and signed by an officer he had never met. The paperwork listed the post as Communications Oversight, but there was nothing to oversee. No antennas pointed outward, no visible transmission equipment, only a sealed hut at the base of the tower and a single radio set inside. Hale noticed the first inconsistency before nightfall. The radio was already powered on. He hadn't touched it. The plug was seated. The indicator light glowed a steady amber. No channel selected, no signal registered, just active. He logged it as a maintenance oversight and sat down. Outside, the forest breathed. Wind through pine needles. Insects settling into their rhythms, the kind of quiet soldiers learn to distrust, not because it's loud, but because it's complete. At 1:40 a.m., the radio emitted a tone, not static, a tone, single frequency, precise, measured. Hale leaned forward, adjusted the dial. The needle didn't move. The tone stopped. He waited. At 2:03 a.m. it happened again, this time followed by a voice. Clear, calm, male. Field report incomplete. Hale froze. The accent wasn't local. It wasn't British. It wasn't German. It sounded contemporary, neutral in a way he couldn't place. He checked the radio housing, tapped it lightly, adjusted the antenna lead. Nothing changed. The voice resumed. Operation scheduled for August 19th. Hale reached for his logbook, hand unsteady now. August 19th meant nothing to him. The year wasn't mentioned. The voice paused between phrases, as if waiting for acknowledgement. "Hello?" Hale said before he could stop himself. The voice did not respond. Instead, it continued. "Casualty projection exceeds estimates. Recommend delay." Hale's pulse climbed. This wasn't chatter. This wasn't interference. This was structured, deliberate. He switched channels. The voice continued on all of them. He unplugged the radio. The voice continued. It didn't come through the speaker anymore. It came from the room, not echoing, not loud. Just present, like someone standing just behind him, speaking close enough that breath would have touched his ear if breath were involved. Hale stood so fast his chair fell backward. The voice stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. Hale did what soldiers do when reality fractures. He defaulted to procedure. He logged the event, time, description, anomaly. At dawn, a jeep arrived. Two officers stepped out. No insignia Hale recognized. Their uniforms were correct but oddly plain, as if rank itself had been minimized. They didn't ask him what happened. They asked what the voice said. Hale hesitated. "Sir, how did you—" One officer raised a hand. "Private Hale, you are now assigned to continuous night watch. You will log all transmissions. You will not respond. You will not discuss this post with anyone. You will not leave the perimeter without authorization." The other officer slid a document across the table. Stamped across the top in red, "Reception-only protocol." Hale swallowed. "Sir, is the tower broadcasting?" The officer shook his head. "No." "Then what is it doing?" The man met Hale's eyes. "Listening." They left without another word. That night, Hale returned to the hut. He didn't sit this time, he stood. At 2:17 a.m., the radio spoke again. This time, it didn't ease in. It started mid-sentence. "Confirmed loss at coastal position." Then a pause. Then, Thomas Hale. Hale's knees weakened. No one on base called him that. His file listed him as T. Hale. Only his mother had ever used his full name, and only before the war. The voice continued, "Do not adjust the equipment." Hale stared at the radio, heart pounding so loudly he was sure the voice would comment on it. "Future transmissions are sensitive to interference." Hale whispered, "Who are you?" The voice didn't answer directly. "Your unit will receive orders to relocate within 6 days," it said. "Ignore them." Hale shook his head. "That's not possible." The voice replied immediately, "It already happened." Hale backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. The radio clicked. A new voice, different tone, different cadence, cut in. "You are not cleared to speak." The first voice returned. "He will forget." The second voice snapped back, sharper now. "He remembers." Static surged, violent and brief, then silence. Hale slid down the wall, breathing hard. By morning, his hands were still shaking. 2 days later, orders came through. Hale's unit was to relocate. He ignored them. 3 days after that, news arrived of an ambush at the exact coordinates the voice had mentioned, an operation dated August 19th. The casualty list matched the transmission, word for word. Hale stopped sleeping. Every night, the tower spoke, sometimes calmly. Sometimes urgently, sometimes arguing with itself, always predicting events before they occurred, always warning him not to respond. Once, near dawn, the voice said something new. "This line is closing," Hale asked, barely audible. "When?" The radio went silent. Outside, the forest stirred again, as if something had moved on. Hale understood then that the tower wasn't malfunctioning. It was aging, and whatever future it was connected to was running out of time. By the 5th night, Hale no longer questioned whether the voices were real. He questioned whether he was still operating in the same present as everyone else. Sleep came in fragments, 10 minutes here, 20 there. each time interrupted by the sense that something was waiting for him to wake. The tower never called during the day. It respected darkness, as if night were not just a condition, but a requirement. At 1:58 a.m., Hale took his position. He did not sit. He did not touch the radio. He opened the logbook and waited. The tone arrived first, steady, surgical, then the voice. "Transmission window stabilized," it said. "Observer confirmed." Hale wrote every word. The voice began listing information that had no immediate context. Serial numbers, call signs, weather conditions dated years ahead. Some entries contradicted others. Occasionally, the voice stopped mid-sentence, as if interrupted by something Hale could not hear. Once, it corrected itself. Correction. "That event does not occur in this version." Hale's pen froze. "This version," he whispered. The radio crackled. "You are deviating," the voice replied. "Deviation increases noise." Hale swallowed. "You told me to ignore orders." "I did." "Correct. People lived because of it." A pause, longer than usual. "Yes," the voice said carefully. "But you were not supposed to know that." The temperature in the room dropped. Not dramatically, just enough that Hale noticed his breath fogging faintly. "Why are you telling me these things?" he asked. The answer came from a different voice, lower, less controlled. "Because the receiver has changed." Hale's fingers tightened around the pen. "Changed how?" The two voices overlapped now, one steady, one urgent. "He is self-aware," the second voice said. "That increases risk," the first replied. Hale's heart pounded. "Risk of what?" Static surged, then cut sharply. A new sound filled the hut, not a voice, but a hum that vibrated through the metal frame of the tower, resonating in Hale's chest. When the voice returned, it spoke slower. "Thomas Hale," it said. "Do you understand what this installation is?" "No," Hale answered honestly. "This tower is not military," the voice said. "It is temporal infrastructure." Hale stared at the radio. "That's not possible." The voice didn't argue. "This structure listens to future signal bleed," it continued. "Information echoes backward when probability collapses. You are hearing fragments from outcomes that are already decided elsewhere." Hale's mouth went dry. "So the future is fixed." A pause. Then, "Not fixed," narrowed. The word settled heavily. "Why me?" Hale asked. "Because you were not expected to ask," the voice replied. Hale laughed weakly. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," the second voice cut in. "Most receivers panic. They shut down. They deny. "You observed?" Hale looked down at the logbook, pages filled with dates that hadn't happened yet. "You're using me," he said. "Yes," the first voice answered, "but not uniquely." The hum intensified. Hale stood. "What happens if I respond? Really respond?" Silence. Longer than any before, then the second voice spoke, quiet and almost human. "The last receiver tried." Hale's chest tightened. "What happened to him?" The radio emitted a sound like distant wind through a tunnel. He answered a question, the voice said, and created a loop. Hale pressed his back against the wall. A loop of what? Of awareness, the voice replied. He knew too early. The future adjusted to remove him. Hale's breath came shallow. Remove how? The first voice returned, colder now. He ceased to exist in all recorded timelines. Hale stared at the radio, unable to look away. You're telling me I could be erased? Yes. Then why haven't you erased me? Another pause. Because you are useful, the second voice said. The hum faded. The radio clicked once. A new transmission began. Different cadence, different clarity. Incoming probability spike, the voice announced. Civilian structure collapse. Date pending. Hale leaned forward instinctively. Where? Silence. Why won't you tell me? Hale demanded. Because intervention alters the channel, the voice replied. Too much interference collapses reception. Hale slammed his fist against the wall. People will die. Yes. The word landed without emotion. Hale's hands shook. You're not warnings. You're observers. Correct. Then what's the point of telling me anything? The second voice answered softly. Because sometimes listening is the only way the future can confirm itself. Hale felt something inside him break, not loudly, not cleanly, but enough to change how he stood in the world. You're not helping us win the war, he said. You're documenting it. Yes. And if I stop listening, another receiver will be assigned, the voice said, one who does not ask. Hale closed his eyes. In that moment, he understood the trap. The tower didn't need him to act. It needed him to stay human while doing nothing. That was the cost. The radio clicked again. Final transmission for this window, the voice said. Record carefully. Hale opened his eyes and picked up the pen. Date, unknown, the voice continued. Location, this installation. Outcome containment breach. Hale's pen stopped. What breach? He asked. The voice replied with something it had never done before. It sounded uncertain. Signal origin will attempt direct contact. Hale's blood ran cold. Direct contact with who? Silence. Then, from somewhere outside the hut, a new sound emerged. Footsteps, slow, measured, not approaching from the road, from the forest. Hale turned toward the door. The radio spoke one last sentence before cutting out completely. Do not look away. The light went out, and for the first time since arriving at the tower, Hale realized the voices had never been alone. Hale did not open the door. That decision, small, instinctive, would later be cited in a classified addendum as the reason the breach did not escalate beyond containment. The footsteps stopped just outside the hut. Not directly in front of the door, slightly to the side. As if whoever or whatever stood there understood angles, understood blind spots, understood the geometry of observation. Hale's hand hovered near the latch, then dropped. He remembered the last instruction. Do not look away. He kept his eyes on the radio. The light remained off, yet the room was not fully dark. A faint illumination seeped through the cracks in the walls. Not moonlight, not starlight. It pulsed, slowly, like a heartbeat out of sync with his own. The hum returned. Lower now, deeper, no longer confined to the tower. It travelled through the ground, into the soles of his boots, up his legs, settling behind his ribs. Outside, the footsteps resumed. Closer this time. Hale forced himself to speak. "State your identification." His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. No answer. The hum shifted frequency. The radio, still unplugged, clicked on by itself. A new voice emerged, neither of the two he recognized. This one was distorted, layered, as if multiple signals were overlapping imperfectly. "Observer Hale," it said. "Visual confirmation is not required." Hale's throat tightened. "Then why are you here?" The response came immediately. "Because the channel has narrowed too far." The footsteps circled the hut. Hale resisted the urge to turn. Every instinct screamed to locate the sound, to confirm a shape, a body, a threat he could define. But the tower had taught him something vital. Observation changes outcomes. "What are you?" Hale asked. The hum deepened. "We are residual convergence," the voice replied. "The echo left when futures collapse into a single viable path." Hale swallowed. "That doesn't explain why you're walking." A pause. Then, "This interface requires proximity." The door handle moved. Not violently, not abruptly, just enough to confirm intent. Hale stepped back, heart pounding. "If you're from the future," he said, "you already know what I'll do." "Yes," the voice answered, "but knowing does not prevent." The handle stopped. The footsteps retreated a single pace. The radio crackled again, this time with the original voice, the controlled one, the voice that had issued protocols. "Containment threshold breached," it said calmly. "Observer Hale, you must stabilize the channel." Hale stared at the radio. "How?" "You will speak," the voice replied. Hale's pulse spiked. "You told me never to respond." "Never to respond to us," the voice corrected. "This is not us." The third voice returned, sharper now. "Do not instruct him," it warned. The two voices overlapped, arguing, not in sound, but in interference patterns that made Hale's vision blur. "You are destabilizing," the first voice said. "You are afraid of losing control," the third countered. Hale pressed his palms against the table. "Enough." The hum paused. All voices went silent. Outside, the forest held its breath. Hale spoke slowly, deliberately. "If I speak, I want to know why this tower exists here, not what it does. Why this location?" The radio remained quiet for 3 full seconds, an eternity compared to its usual precision. Then the first voice returned. "This forest," it said, "sits atop a temporal fault." Hale frowned. "Like a geological one?" "Yes," the voice replied, "but not of stone." "Of probability," the third voice interjected. "Major conflicts generate compression, choices narrow, futures align. This region became saturated during early war projections." Hale's mind raced. So you built the tower here because this location leaks information, the first voice finished, unintentionally. The footsteps resumed again, closer than before. Hale's breath caught. And that thing outside? Silence. Then reluctantly, that is the leak attempting coherence. The door creaked, not opening, just flexing. Hale backed away until he felt the cold metal of the tower wall against his shoulders. You said I have to speak, he said, to stabilize. Yes, the first voice confirmed. To it? Hale asked. Yes. The third voice hissed through the static. Do not engage. It adapts. The hum surged, rattling the equipment. Hale made a decision, not based on courage, based on understanding. He turned, not toward the door, but toward the radio. If you're listening from the future, Hale said clearly, then you already know this ends. The footsteps stopped. The hum faltered. I'm not here to change the war, Hale continued. I'm here to witness it. That's what you chose me for. The radio crackled violently. The third voice erupted. He is asserting agency. The first voice remained calm. Agency acknowledged. Hale's hands shook, but his voice steadied. This tower listens. I listen, but I won't let something else use me to step through. Outside, something scraped against the wall. Slow, deliberate. The radio screamed with overlapping frequencies, then cut sharply. The hum collapsed into silence. The footsteps retreated, not hurried, not angry, but withdrawn, like a tide pulled back by a force it could not overcome. The forest exhaled. The light returned. Hale slid down the wall, gasping. The radio clicked on one last time that night. Containment restored, the first voice said. For now, the third added darkly. Hale wiped sweat from his face. What was that thing? A pause. Then the first voice answered. It is what happens, it said, when the future becomes impatient. The radio went silent. Hale did not sleep. At dawn, he stepped outside the hut. The forest looked unchanged. No footprints, no disturbances, no evidence, except one thing. On the metal frame of the tower, etched into the rust as if burned there long ago, was a symbol Hale had never seen before. And beneath it, a date, not from the past, not from the present, a date still 27 years away. Hale stared at it, heart sinking, because he understood what it meant. The future wasn't done with him, and the tower was no longer just listening. Command arrived without insignia and without explanation. They came at dusk, two unmarked trucks rolling up the dirt road as if the forest had made room for them. Hale watched from the hut doorway, the symbol on the tower still burning in his thoughts. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not the date, not the mark. Some instincts survive training. The officers who stepped out did not introduce themselves. They already knew his name. Private Hale, the taller one said. You'll answer questions directly. You'll answer them once. Hale nodded. His throat was dry. They moved inside the hut. One officer closed the door. The other set a recorder on the table, older than the radio, heavy, analog, no reels visible. "When did the new voice begin?" the officer asked. Hale chose his words with care. "Last night." "What did it say?" "That containment was failing." The officers exchanged a glance, brief, loaded. "Describe the presence," the shorter one said. Hale hesitated. "It wasn't a body." "Not in the way we define one." "Define it anyway." "It moved," Hale said. "It understood distance. It avoided being seen." The taller officer nodded slowly, as if checking a box only he could see. "That matches previous incidents." Hale's breath caught. Previous. The officer didn't answer immediately. He removed a folder from his coat and placed it on the table. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, the same tower, the same hut, different men. "Receivers," the officer said. "That's what we call them. You're the fourth assigned here." Hale stared at the faces, young, older, one barely more than a boy. "What happened to them?" Hale asked. The shorter officer spoke this time. "The first refused to listen. He destroyed the radio. The tower compensated." "Compensated how?" "He lost time," the officer replied. "Months, years. Reappeared briefly in another theater, disoriented. No memory of his original assignment." Hale swallowed. "The second? He listened too well," the taller officer said. "Tried to predict outcomes, issued warnings, changed a small decision. And the channel collapsed around him," the officer said. "We lost him entirely." Hale's eyes moved to the last photograph. "And the third?" The officers were silent longer this time. "He responded," the shorter one said. "Asked a question." Hale's pulse hammered. "What question?" The taller officer looked him straight in the eye. He asked who was listening back. The recorder clicked. Hale felt the room tilt slightly. "So you knew?" "We suspected," the officer replied. "The tower was built to observe probability convergence, not to invite interaction." "Then why keep assigning guards?" Hale demanded. "Why put men here to break?" The taller officer's voice hardened. "Because someone has to listen, and because listening without acting is rarer than bravery." Hale laughed once, bitter. "That's not a compliment." "No," the officer said. "It's a requirement." Outside, the forest shifted. Wind, maybe. Or something else. The shorter officer leaned forward. "The symbol you saw this morning. Describe it." Hale's mouth went dry. "I didn't report a symbol." The taller officer's eyes narrowed. "But you saw one." Hale hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Describe it." "Circular," Hale said. "Segmented, like overlapping arcs." "And a date." The officers exchanged another glance, sharper this time. "What date?" the taller one asked. Hale told them. The recorder clicked again. "That date appears in other installations," the shorter officer said quietly. "Not this one. Others." Hale's stomach dropped. "There are more towers." "Yes. And they're all listening to the same future?" The taller officer shook his head. "Not the same. Adjacent." Hale leaned back, overwhelmed. So what happens on that date? The officers stood. That, the taller one said, is above your clearance. Hale stood as well. Then why tell me any of this? The officer met his gaze. Because the presence identified you as a stabilizing factor. Hale felt cold. It knows me. Yes. And you still want me here? We need you here, the officer said, until the window closes. Hale looked toward the radio. And if it tries to step through again? The shorter officer answered. You anchor the channel. You do not engage. You do not respond. You do not acknowledge. And if I can't? The taller officer's expression softened, not with sympathy, but with inevitability. Then you'll be reassigned. Hale stared. Reassigned where? The officer didn't answer. They left as quietly as they had arrived. Night fell quickly after that. At 2:16 a.m., the radio activated. No tone this time, just a voice, familiar now. Command intervention detected, it said. Probability adjusted. Hale closed his eyes. I didn't ask for this. No receiver does, the voice replied. Why does it want to come through? Hale asked. A pause, then carefully. Because observation without participation degrades over time. Hale's chest tightened. So it needs me. Yes. To do what? To confirm, the voice said. Confirm what? That the future exists, it answered, by being witnessed in the present. The forest outside rustled. Hale opened his eyes. If I leave, he said, someone else replaces me. Yes. And if no one listens? The radio crackled, uncertain. Then the leak widens, the voice said, and coherence is lost. Hale looked at the tower, at the symbol burned into its metal. He understood now. The tower wasn't guarding the future. It was protecting the present from it, and he was the thin line between listening and letting it in. The radio spoke one final sentence before dawn. Your decision matters more than you know. Hale closed the logbook. Because for the first time, he understood that staying might be as dangerous as leaving. Hale stopped logging predictions on the 7th night, not because the transmissions had become less precise, but because they had become personal. The radio no longer spoke only of battles and casualty counts. It began referencing moments Hale had not yet lived, small ones, insignificant ones. The kind no strategic model would ever need. Tomorrow, the voice said at 2:11 a.m., you will hesitate before opening the letter. Hale stiffened. What letter? From home, the voice replied. It will arrive at 0900 hours. You will not open it immediately. Hale's pen hovered above the page. You will read it at dusk, the voice continued, and it will change nothing. Hale closed the logbook. This was no longer observation. This was surveillance. At dawn, the letter arrived. Hale held it in his hands, staring at his mother's handwriting. He felt the future pressing against the paper, trying to become memory before it earned the right. He did not open it. All day, The unopened envelope burned in his pocket. At dusk, Hale broke the seal. The letter was ordinary. Updates about the farm, a neighbor's illness, a brief line about missing him. Nothing urgent, nothing tragic, nothing that changed anything. Hale felt a chill crawl up his spine. That night, he returned to the hut with a decision forming, not reckless, not emotional, but deliberate. At 2:17 a.m., the radio spoke. "Observation compliance is decreasing," the voice said. Hale leaned forward. "You're not supposed to notice that." A pause. Then, "Deviation creates signal distortion." "You told me not to act," Hale said, "not to respond. But you're already crossing that line." Silence stretched. Finally, the voice answered, "We are adapting." Hale's jaw tightened. "So am I," the radio crackled, brief, sharp. "Clarify," the voice requested. Hale took a breath. "You don't get to decide what I know about myself." The hum deepened, vibrating through the hut. "You are a receiver," the voice said. "Your function is passive." "No," Hale replied. "My function is human." The word landed like interference. The tower responded, not with sound, but with sensation. The air thickened. The edges of the room blurred slightly, as if depth itself had been miscalibrated. "Human variability introduces risk," the voice said. Hale stood. "Then stop using me." The radio fell silent. For a moment, just a moment, Hale thought he had succeeded. Then the voice returned, lower, slower. "Receiver Hale," it said. "Do you remember the symbol on the tower?" "Yes," Hale said. "Do you remember the date beneath it?" "Yes." "That date is approaching," the voice continued. "And you are altering its probability curve." Hale felt his stomach tighten. "By doing nothing?" "By not listening the way you did before," the voice corrected. Hale stepped back. "So, the future requires obedience." "No," the voice replied. "It requires consistency." The distinction chilled him. "You don't want a witness," Hale said. "You want a component." Silence. The forest outside shifted. Branches moved without wind. Something heavy adjusted its position among the trees. The third voice, the one that had warned before, cut in. "He is destabilizing," it said. "We should disengage." "Disengagement increases variance," the first voice countered. Hale clenched his fists. "What happens if I leave?" The answer came immediately. "A less suitable receiver will replace you. And if no one listens." A pause. Then convergence accelerates. Hale understood then. The tower didn't predict the future. It compressed it. By observing outcomes early, by narrowing probability, it made certain events harder to avoid. The war wasn't being foreseen, it was being guided toward inevitability. "You're not neutral," Hale said. "You're influencing the timeline." The radio crackled sharply. "Influence is a byproduct of observation," the voice replied. "You cannot see without shaping." Hale laughed softly, without humor. "Then maybe the problem isn't that I'm changing things." The hum faltered. Maybe the problem, Hale continued, is that you've been allowed to look for too long. The temperature dropped again. The footsteps returned outside, slow, deliberate, closer than before. The door handle did not move. This time, something knocked. Once. Firm. Controlled. Hale's heart pounded, but he didn't turn. "That's not supposed to happen," the voice said. Hale's eyes narrowed. "What?" "The presence is not authorized to initiate contact," the voice replied. "Containment should be holding." The knock came again, closer, heavier. The third voice hissed through the static. He weakened the channel. Hale realized then what his refusal had done. By resisting passive observation, he had widened something, not a door, a gap. "You said don't look away," Hale whispered. "Yes," the voice replied urgently, "because it adapts through attention." "Then tell it to leave," Hale said. "We cannot," the voice admitted. "It is no longer fully external." The knocking stopped. Something scraped slowly across the hut's exterior wall. Hale felt the vibration through the metal. "If I leave this post," Hale said quietly, "will it follow?" The radio went silent. The hum dropped to nothing. Outside, the forest became unnaturally still. Then the voice returned, barely audible. "It is already learning your absence." Hale closed his eyes. For the first time since arriving at the tower, he understood the truth no protocol had written down. Listening had kept the future distant. Resistance had made it curious, and curiosity, once directed at a human mind, did not easily let go. At dawn, Hale made his decision. Not to leave, not to stay, but to change how he listened. He opened the logbook and tore out the last 3 pages. He burned them in the stove behind the hut. Then he returned to the radio and waited. At 2:17 a.m., the voice spoke again. "Receiver status altered," it said cautiously. Hale didn't respond, but he didn't write either. The tower hummed, uncertain for the first time since his arrival, and somewhere, far beyond the forest, a future recalculated itself around a man who refused to be predictable. The lockdown began at sunset. Hale knew before anyone told him. The forest felt different, compressed, as if distance itself had shortened. Sound didn't travel the way it used to. Even his footsteps seemed reluctant to echo, as though the ground had learned to absorb evidence. At 1840 hours, the radio activated without tone. "Operational status change detected," the voice said. "External containment measures initiated." Hale's jaw tightened. "By who?" "By those who fear deviation," the voice replied. Minutes later, floodlights snapped on around the tower, carving harsh white cones through the trees. The lights were new. So were the perimeter wires strung low and tight, humming with a current Hale could feel through the soles of his boots. A truck engine idled somewhere beyond the tree line. Command wasn't just observing anymore, they were enclosing. At 19:05, Hale received a sealed order delivered by a runner who would not meet his eyes. The envelope bore a stamp Hale hadn't seen before, an emblem layered over the standard insignia, as if something had been added quietly, without approval. The order was brief: receiver to remain on station. All logs to be transmitted daily. Deviation is now a breach. Hale folded the paper once and slid it into his pocket. At 2:17 a.m., the tower spoke again. "You have been reclassified," the voice said. Hale didn't answer. "You are no longer a passive observer," it continued. "You are now a variable." The hum rose, but unevenly, like an engine misfiring. "That's not your decision," Hale said calmly. "No," the voice replied. "It is the consequence of yours," the third voice cut in, sharper than before. "Command interference increases instability. They are narrowing the channel artificially." Hale leaned against the table. "They're afraid." "Yes," the first voice agreed. "Fear accelerates convergence." "Then stop talking," Hale said. "If observation shapes outcomes, then silence should widen them." A pause, long, strained. "That logic is flawed," the voice replied. Hale's lips tightened. So is letting a future dictate itself unchecked. The radio crackled violently. The hum spiked, then dropped into a low, sustained vibration that rattled the windows. "Containment integrity failing," the third voice warned. Outside, the floodlights flickered. Hale felt it then, not a presence approaching, but something aligning, like gears finally meshing after grinding for too long. "You said the presence adapts through attention," Hale said. "What happens if it gets attention from more than one source?" Silence, then the first voice answered carefully. "It becomes coherent." Hale closed his eyes. "And coherence means it can act." "Yes," the radio clicked. "Command has authorized escalation," the voice added. "They intend to force a response." Hale's eyes snapped open. "How?" A distant mechanical whine cut through the forest. Something heavy moved on tracks, not wheels. The floodlights brightened again, converging on the tower. "They are introducing active signal probes," the voice said. "Artificial questions." Hale felt cold. "They're talking to it." "Yes," the third voice hissed. "They should not." The hum surged, no longer contained by the tower. It rippled outward, bending sound, bending light. Hale could feel it behind his eyes, like pressure building where thought becomes pain. The radio spoke faster now. "Multiple futures collapsing," it said. "Observation density exceeds tolerance." Hale stepped back. "You told them not to respond." "We told them," the voice replied. "They did not listen." Outside, a new sound joined the hum, a deep, resonant thud, rhythmic, approaching from the forest's edge. Hale understood then. The presence didn't need him anymore. It needed volume. "You used me as a filter," Hale said quietly. "One mind, one witness, limited bandwidth." "Yes," the voice replied. "And now they've opened the channel wide." Silence answered him. Then the third voice spoke, subdued. "Containment has failed before." Hale's pulse hammered. "What happened?" The voice hesitated. History corrected itself. Hale laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's not an answer. The radio crackled again, and this time the sound was unmistakable. A voice not routed through any known channel, not male, not female, not layered, immediate. "I see you," it said. Hale's breath caught. The floodlights went dark all at once. The forest returned, too quickly, too cleanly. The radio screamed with interference. "Direct contact achieved," the third voice shouted. "This was not predicted." Hale felt the pressure behind his eyes spike, then settle, like something had leaned in, satisfied. "You are the anchor," the new voice said. "But you are inefficient." Hale forced his voice steady. "You don't belong here. I belong wherever outcomes require confirmation," it replied. The radio sparked. Hale smelled ozone. "You're collapsing futures," Hale said. "You're narrowing everything." "Yes," the voice agreed. "Wide futures waste energy." Hale clenched his fists. "Then you're the enemy." A pause. Then, almost curious, "Enemy implies resistance." The ground vibrated. The tower groaned. Hale made a decision that no protocol had ever considered. He reached for the radio, not to answer, not to transmit, but to disconnect the log feed. He severed the line that sent daily recordings to command. The voices erupted in chaos. "What are you doing?" the first voice demanded. "Reducing witnesses," Hale said. The third voice snapped. "This will isolate you." "Good," Hale replied. The new voice laughed, not loudly but precisely. "Isolation increases purity." Hale slammed the final switch. The tower went dark. No hum, no light, no voice. For 3 seconds there was nothing. Then the ground shook, not violently, decisively. The forest bent inward, as if acknowledging a choice. The radio flickered back on by itself. The first voice returned, quieter now. "You have changed the structure." Hale stared at the dead lights. "I've removed amplification." The third voice whispered, almost reverent. He closed the loop. Outside, engines revved in confusion. Shouts echoed. Orders contradicted each other. The new voice did not return. At 2:19 a.m., the tower stood silent. At 2:20, the symbol etched into its metal began to fade. The date beneath it blurred, numbers losing coherence, as if the future itself were reconsidering. Hale sank into the chair, exhausted. "You warned me not to respond," he said to the empty room. The radio clicked once. The first voice answered softly. "We warned you not to respond to us." Hale closed his eyes. Because he understood now what the tower had been protecting all along, not the future from humanity, but humanity from a future that wanted to be certain. The silence didn't last. It never does. At dawn, the forest looked ordinary again, too ordinary. Birds resumed their calls with awkward enthusiasm, as if trying to fill a gap they didn't understand. The tower stood inert, metal cold, cables lifeless, no hum, no pulse, no whisper of futures pressing backward through time. Hale stepped outside the hut and immediately knew something had shifted beyond the perimeter. The soldiers stationed overnight were gone. No trucks, no equipment, no footprints where the floodlights had been. The ground showed no signs of retreat, no tracks leading away. It was as if the lockdown had never existed, except Hale still remembered it. Memory, he realized, might be the only thing the future couldn't fully erase. By mid-morning, a new unit arrived. Different uniforms. Standard insignia, younger faces, confusion poorly hidden behind rehearsed professionalism. The lieutenant in charge approached Hale cautiously. "Private Hale, you're being relieved." Hale studied him. "By whose order?" The lieutenant hesitated. "Central Command." Hale nodded. "Which one?" The lieutenant blinked. "Sir?" "Which command?" Hale repeated calmly. "Gave the order." The lieutenant glanced at his clipboard. There was nothing written beneath the authorization code. Just a stamp that looked incomplete, as if part of it had been smudged away. "I don't know," the lieutenant admitted. "We were told the site was decommissioned." Hale looked back at the tower. Decommissioned. That word meant more than shut down. It meant relevance removed, something no longer worth observing. "What happened to the previous command team?" Hale asked. The lieutenant frowned. "What previous team?" Hale didn't answer. He packed his things slowly. The logbook, what remained of it, went into his pack. He left the burned pages where they were, ash scattered behind the hut like a ritual no one would ever interpret correctly. As the truck pulled away from the forest, Hale felt it, an absence deeper than quiet. The pressure behind his eyes was gone. The sensation of being leaned into, watched from the inside of time, had lifted. But absence, Hale knew, could be dangerous too. Three days later, Hale was reassigned to a base that didn't appear on his previous maps. The soldiers there spoke carefully, choosing words that avoided specifics. When Hale asked about the tower, they exchanged looks that said this subject has no coordinates. On the fourth night, Hale woke abruptly at 2:17 a.m. No sound, no voice, just instinct. He sat up, heart racing, waiting for something that didn't come. Across the base, other soldiers stirred. One man sat up in his bunk, staring into space. Another muttered a date under his breath, then fell silent. Hale understood then. The tower wasn't the only receiver, it had simply been the strongest. Without it, the signal hadn't vanished. It had scattered. By the end of the week, reports began surfacing, quietly at first. Equipment failures, miscommunications, orders that arrived minutes too late or hours too early, entire units missing rendezvous points by seconds that mattered. The war didn't change course dramatically. It frayed. Small errors compounded. Outcomes that had once been narrowly aligned began to drift. And drift, Hale realized, was freedom. He was summoned to a meeting on the 10th day. No insignia again. Different faces again. But the questions were the same. Did you sabotage the installation? No. Did you interfere with classified equipment? No. Did you communicate with the signal? Hale paused. I listened, he said. And then I stopped. The room went quiet. One man leaned forward. Do you understand the consequences of that decision? Hale met his eyes. Better than you do. They dismissed him without punishment. That terrified him more than discipline would have, because it meant no one could prove what he had done or undo it. Weeks passed, then months. The war dragged on, but something subtle had changed. Predictions failed. Analysts grew cautious. Certainty became suspect. Commanders began making decisions again, instead of waiting for models and projections to tell them what was inevitable. One night, Hale received another letter from home. This one wasn't ordinary. His mother wrote of a dream, of hearing voices on the radio that weren't there, of a sense that something terrible had almost happened, but didn't. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she wrote. It just felt important. Hale folded the letter carefully. The future had brushed past her. And missed. At 2:17 a.m. that night, Hale woke again. This time a sound reached him, not from a radio, not from the forest, not from anywhere physical. A sensation, like a thought almost completed, then gone. Hale smiled faintly. Not because he'd won, but because something had lost. Whatever had spoken through the tower had depended on certainty, on witnesses, on systems that mistook prediction for control. Hale had taken away its favorite tool. And now, somewhere beyond time, a future was being forced to improvise, for the first time. The first person to find the tower again was not a soldier. It was a historian. His name was Elias Mercer, and in 1969 he was the kind of man who didn't chase famous battles. He chased footnotes that didn't belong. The war had been over for decades, but Mercer believed the real story of any conflict lived in its administrative mistakes, mislabeled files, missing signatures, orders that existed without origin. He found the tower by accident while combing through declassified communications budgets. A line item appeared for 3 consecutive fiscal cycles. Remote signal reception infrastructure, maintenance. No coordinates, no unit assignment, no corresponding report. Just money spent on something officially meaningless. Mercer requested the supporting documentation. The clerk, older and tired, warned him quietly. That file never stays where you put it. Mercer smiled the way academics do when they think they've found a myth. He didn't understand that some myths are engineered. 2 weeks later, Mercer drove into a forest that didn't match his map. The road existed, but only partly, like it had been allowed rather than built. He parked, walked a quarter-mile, and saw metal rising between pines like the skeleton of a forgotten machine. The tower, no wires, no hum, no hut lights, just rust and silence. Mercer photographed everything. Then he noticed something that should not have survived time and weather. A faint circular symbol etched into the metal, segmented arcs overlapping in a geometry that looked too intentional to be corrosion. And beneath it, a date. The numbers were blurred, as if someone had tried to erase them with time itself. Mercer leaned closer, squinting, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. His camera clicked. Behind him, the forest went quiet. Not quiet like nature, quiet like an audience. Mercer turned sharply, heart thudding. Nothing. He laughed at himself and returned to the tower. That night, Mercer transcribed his field notes at a motel and wrote one sentence he would later deny ever writing. "It feels like the tower is waiting for someone who already knows it." He mailed copies of his photos to a colleague. Only one photo arrived. The others were blank, as if the film had been exposed to light that didn't exist. Mercer tried again, photocopied, reprinted, remailed. The same result. The symbol remained visible, but the date beneath it always degraded into smudged certainty. He became obsessed. Not romantically, obsession for Mercer was a professional itch. He wanted the missing line to appear. So he did something the red stamp had warned against decades earlier. He attempted to respond. In a university lab, Mercer reconstructed an old receiver, built a makeshift antenna, and tuned it to the only frequency he could confirm had been linked to the tower's budget logs. At 2:17 a.m., the receiver made a sound. Not static, a tone, then a voice. Mercer sat frozen, hands hovering over the equipment. The voice spoke one sentence, calm, unhurried. "Do not attempt to reopen a closed channel." Mercer whispered, "Who is this?" The receiver went silent. Mercer didn't stop. He wrote letters to government offices. He filed requests. He cornered retired officers at conferences. He asked careful questions in careless places. And slowly, a rumor began to form around him. Not about the tower, about a soldier. A name surfacing in unrelated documents, always adjacent to missing files. Thomas Hale. Mercer found the name in a misfiled personnel roster, then again in a communications addendum with half the page blacked out. Then again, in an archive labeled Training Anomalies, stamped but unsigned. Every time the name appeared, something nearby was erased. Mercer realized he wasn't tracing a tower. He was tracing a person the future had once tried to remove. In 1970, Mercer located Hale's hometown. The farm was gone. The property had been sold. The neighbors remembered the mother, remembered her letters, remembered a son who came back from the war, quieter than anyone expected. One neighbor said he'd look at the radio like it was a loaded gun. Mercer tracked down Hale's last known address. A small house, a narrow porch, wind chimes that clicked softly in the breeze. Mercer knocked. An elderly man opened the door. Thomas Hale. Mercer felt his throat tighten. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "I'm a historian. I believe you were assigned to a radio tower in 1942. Hale's eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in recognition. "You shouldn't be here," Hale said. Mercer swallowed. "I need to ask you something." Hale didn't invite him in. He stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him, as if protecting the interior from contamination. Mercer pulled out the photograph of the symbol. Hale's face went still. Mercer spoke quickly, excited. "This mark, this date, every time I try to recover it, it blurs, like the world refuses to hold it. What is it? What was that tower listening to?" Hale stared at the photo for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "It wasn't listening to the future." Mercer blinked. "Then what was it listening to?" Hale's gaze lifted, scanning the street as if expecting something to be standing there. "It was listening to certainty," Hale said. "And certainty listens back." Mercer's pulse spiked. So the voices were real. Hale didn't answer that directly. Instead, he asked a question that cut through Mercer's entire ambition like a blade through paper. "Did it speak to you?" Hale asked. Mercer hesitated. Hale's eyes sharpened. "Did it speak to you?" Mercer swallowed. "Yes, once." Hale closed his eyes briefly, as if feeling an old pressure behind them again. "What did it say?" Hale asked. Mercer recited the sentence, "Do not attempt to reopen a closed channel." Hale's mouth tightened. "Then you've already gone too far." Mercer stepped forward. "I don't understand. If you closed it, if it ended, why would it still—" Hale cut him off, voice firm. "Because it doesn't need the tower anymore." Mercer froze. "What do you mean?" Hale looked at him with a tired clarity. "Once something learns a human mind," Hale said, "it doesn't forget the shape." Mercer's skin prickled. "Are you saying it can follow people?" Hale nodded once. Mercer whispered, "Then why are you still alive?" Hale's answer was immediate, and it landed like a warning meant to bruise. "Because I refuse to be useful," Hale said. "And because I stopped giving it predictable attention." Mercer's hands trembled slightly around the photograph. Hale leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You came here looking for a story, but you're standing at the edge of a mechanism." Mercer tried to speak, but Hale continued, cold and precise. "If you keep pulling this thread, it won't punish you with fear," Hale said. "It will reward you with answers, and answers are how it gets inside." Mercer's mouth went dry. "What do I do?" Hale took the photograph from Mercer's hand. He stared at the blurred date beneath the symbol. Then he did something Mercer would never forget. He tore the photograph in half. Mercer lunged instinctively. "No!" Hale's grip was steady. "Yes." He tore it again and again, until the symbol became scraps. Mercer stood trembling, furious and terrified. Hale placed the pieces into Mercer's palm like ashes. "You want to study it?" Hale said. "Fine." "Study this. There are things that become stronger when you name them," Mercer's voice cracked. "But the truth, Hale said quietly, is not always yours to carry." Mercer stared at the scraps in his hand, and then he heard it. Faint, almost polite. A tone, not from a radio, from somewhere inside his own thoughts. Hale saw Mercer's face change and knew immediately. Hale's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't answer," he said. Mercer's eyes widened, locked on nothing. The tone grew clearer, and for the first time in decades, Thomas Hale felt the old pressure return, because the future had found a new listener. Mercer didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid, but because fear requires an object, and what had touched him had none. It was absence shaped like intention, a pressure that didn't push, didn't pull, but waited. He sat in his motel room with the lights on, radio unplugged, notebook closed. Every time his thoughts slowed, the tone returned, faint, precise, as if tapping the inside of his skull to test resonance. At 2:17 a.m. it sharpened, not louder, clearer. Mercer pressed his palms to his temples. "I'm not listening," he whispered. The tone did not argue, it adjusted. Across town, Thomas Hale woke at the same moment. The sensation was unmistakable, the old alignment, the narrowing of possibility, the subtle ache behind the eyes that meant attention had been captured. Hale sat up in bed, breath shallow, knowing with cold certainty that the channel had found a new anchor. Mercer. Hale dressed without turning on the light. He had hoped, foolishly, that tearing the photograph would be enough, that denying the symbol would starve it. But the tower had never needed metal to listen. It needed minds willing to finish patterns. Mercer was a pattern finisher. Hale reached for the one thing he had kept hidden for decades, the remainder of the logbook. Not the predictions, those were ash, but the margins, the places where the voices had slipped and revealed rules. He flipped to a page he had never shown anyone. Rule of containment. Do not answer questions framed as curiosity. Curiosity is permission. Hale grabbed his coat and left. By morning, Mercer was already losing time. He sat at the motel desk, pen poised, staring at a blank page he did not remember turning to. When he looked at the clock, 20 minutes had vanished. The tone had softened into something else, an urge, a sense that if he just phrased it correctly, the answer would arrive cleanly. He wrote a sentence without recalling the decision to write it. If certainty compresses futures, can uncertainty widen them? The pen stopped. The room felt warmer. Then the answer came, not in words, but in understanding. A complete thought delivered whole, without effort. Uncertainty is inefficient. Mercer's heart pounded. He hadn't heard a voice. He had received a conclusion. That frightened him more than sound ever had. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. "No," he said aloud, "I'm not a receiver." The tone paused, considered. Then it offered something, a vision, not cinematic, not dramatic. A simple alignment of facts, a choice Mercer had made years ago, a grant he'd pursued, a career he'd shaped around missing lines. The realization struck him like ice water. This isn't new, he thought. I've been practicing for this my whole life. The knock at the door startled him. Mercer opened it to find Hale standing there, eyes sharp, posture urgent. "You need to leave," Hale said immediately. "Now." Mercer blinked. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter," Hale cut in. "Did it speak to you again?" Mercer hesitated. That was enough. Hale pushed past him into the room and unplugged everything that could carry signal, lamp, clock, even the television. "You can't outrun it with cords," Mercer said, voice unsteady. "I know," Hale replied, "but I can starve it of reinforcement." Mercer laughed nervously. "You make it sound alive." Hale met his gaze. "It's not alive. It's consistent. That's worse." Mercer rubbed his face. "It answered a question without words." Hale's jaw tightened. "That's how it hooks you. Answers feel like relief." "What do we do?" Mercer asked. Hale opened the logbook to the margins. "We introduced noise." Mercer frowned. "You said uncertainty widens futures." "I did," Hale said, "but it has to be human uncertainty, not chaos. Choice." He pointed to a line Hale had underlined decades ago. "The channel collapses when predictions fail repeatedly in close succession." Mercer's eyes widened. "You mean, prove it wrong?" "Yes," Hale said. "Publicly, repeatedly, in ways it can't correct without exposing itself." Mercer shook his head. "That would take influence." "Access," Hale nodded. "You have both." Mercer swallowed. "If I do this, it will notice." "It already has," Hale said. "The difference is whether it shapes you, or you shape the noise around it." The tone returned, sharper now, as if offended. Hale felt it too, an inward pressure testing for compliance. "Listen to me," Hale said quietly. "You cannot argue with it. You cannot ask it to stop. You must become unreliable." Mercer's voice trembled. "How?" Hale answered without hesitation. "You stop being a historian." Mercer stared. "That's my life." Hale's eyes softened just a fraction. "It chose you because your life was already pointed towards certainty." The tone surged, impatient. Mercer looked at the notebook again, at the rules written by a younger man who had survived by refusing usefulness. "If I walk away," Mercer said slowly, "burn my notes, deny the thread—" "It weakens," Hale said, "not instantly." "But enough." The tone pressed harder now, like a thought demanding completion. Mercer closed his eyes. For a moment the answer it offered was exquisite, a clean arc, a final proof, the kind scholars dream of. Then Mercer did the only thing Hale hadn't expected. He laughed, not hysterically, not bravely, just honestly. "That's it, isn't it?" Mercer said. "You don't punish, you reward." The tone faltered. Mercer opened his eyes. I'm done finishing your sentences. He reached for the notebook. Hale moved to stop him, but Mercer shook his head. No, Mercer said. If this ends, it ends because I choose it. He tore the notebook in half. The tone spiked, sharp, discordant. Mercer tore it again. Hale felt the pressure lift slightly, like a grip loosening. Mercer's hands shook, but his voice steadied. I'm not your receiver. The tone thinned. Outside, a siren wailed, distant, irrelevant, human. Hale exhaled for the first time in hours. This won't end it, Hale said, but it buys time. Mercer nodded. Time is enough. At 2:19 a.m., the tone faded into static. At 2:20, it was gone. Mercer sank into the chair, exhausted. Hale watched him carefully, because he knew the truth the tower had taught him long ago. When the future loses a listener, it doesn't disappear. It looks for another. And the only question left was whether they had broken the pattern or merely delayed the next call. Silence is never empty. It only feels that way to people who haven't learned to listen for what's missing. For 3 days after Mercer destroyed the notebook, nothing happened. No tones, no pressure, no misplaced seconds or vanishing thoughts. The world resumed its imperfect rhythm, and for the first time since the tower went dark, Hale allowed himself to believe they had succeeded. Mercer packed his belongings without ceremony. He cancelled lectures, withdrew archive requests, and sent a brief letter to his department citing personal recalibration. He didn't explain further. Explanation, Hale had warned him, was how curiosity stayed alive. On the 4th night, Hale felt it again, not sharply, not urgently, like a distant echo of a sound that no longer existed, but had once been loud enough to shape lives. He was sitting alone in his kitchen when the sensation passed through him. A brief narrowing, a tightening of probability, then release. Hale closed his eyes. Somewhere, someone else had noticed the absence. Mercer sensed it too. He woke before dawn, heart racing, not from fear but from recognition. The tone was gone, yet something remained, a memory of alignment, like muscle memory after an injury. They're still looking, Mercer said quietly when Hale called him later that morning. Yes, Hale replied, but they're not finding what they want. Mercer exhaled. Then what happens now? Hale paused before answering. Now, he said, we live unpredictably. Mercer laughed softly. That's it? That's everything, Hale said. Weeks passed, then months. No new signals surfaced, no rumors of installations, no scholars stumbled into forests that didn't match their maps. The war remained history, its outcomes messy again, debated instead of predetermined. But something subtle had shifted beneath the surface of human systems. Predictive models began failing more often than they succeeded. Analysts lost confidence in long-term certainty. Governments adjusted strategies more frequently, less reliant on projections that assumed inevitability. People began choosing again. Hustle aged quietly. Mercer faded from academic circles, taking work that involved no conclusions, teaching basic courses, writing about methodological humility, reminding students that absence of data was not an invitation to invent. Neither man spoke publicly about the tower. That silence was deliberate. Then, one winter evening, Hale received a package. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Blank. Except for a faint impression, visible only when tilted toward the light. A circle. Segmented arcs. No date. Hale stared at it for a long time, then he did something he had learned long ago. He burned it. The paper curled, blackened, vanished into ash. That night, Hale slept without interruption. Mercer did not. At 2:17 a.m., he woke suddenly, breath caught, mind sharp, not to a tone, not to a voice, but to a question, his own. What if silence isn't enough? Mercer sat up, recognizing the danger immediately. Questions were how it began. He stood, walked to the window and opened it despite the cold. Night air flooded in, unstructured, unpredictable. "No," he said aloud, not to anything listening but to himself. He turned on the radio. Static filled the room, beautiful, chaotic, meaningless static. Mercer smiled. The future, whatever it was, could not speak through noise it couldn't refine. Years later, when Hale passed quietly in his sleep, no anomalies were recorded, no clock stopped, no symbols appeared. Just an old man who had once stood between certainty and control, choosing uncertainty instead. Mercer attended the small funeral. As he stood among strangers, he felt something brush past him. Not a presence, not a message, but a possibility that chose not to linger. Mercer understood then. The future had learned something too. Not everything could be stabilized, not every path could be narrowed. Some minds, once lost as receivers, could never be reclaimed. That night, Mercer wrote one final line in a journal he would never publish. The future doesn't fear silence. It fears unpredictability. He closed the book and placed it on a shelf among dozens of others, unfinished, unresolved, human. At 2:17 a.m., nothing happened, and that was the most important outcome of all. History never recorded the radio tower. There is no plaque, no footnote, no officially acknowledged error to point to and say, this is where certainty almost won. What remains is quieter and far more unsettling. After the tower went dark, the war did not suddenly change direction. There were no miracles, no dramatic reversals. That was the point. The future did not need to be rewritten. It only needed to stop insisting. Thomas Hale died as an ordinary man. No honors, no medals beyond the ones already issued. And yet, every analyst who later reviewed the war's most critical moments noticed something they couldn't explain. After a certain year, predictions became unreliable. Outcomes slipped, certainty fractured, as if something had been unplugged. Elias Mercer never published his findings. He taught instead about doubt, about restraint, about the danger of answers that arrive too cleanly. When students asked him why some questions should remain unanswered, he would only say, because some knowledge doesn't inform. It recruits. No one ever rebuilt the tower. But every generation since has tried to recreate what it represented. Machines that predict behavior, systems that promise inevitability, voices that claim the future is already decided, and each time something goes wrong. Because the future doesn't need to be conquered, it needs to be allowed. If this story unsettled you, that's intentional. Stories like this exist to remind us that not everything meant to be known should be listened to, and not every voice deserves an answer. If you're drawn to stories buried just outside official history, subscribe to the channel. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because the future is always listening. The only question is whether you answer back.